Right, well, we'll just get started then. So Thank you all very much, everybody, for joining us today. Just to give a quick run through of where we're at, my name's Leanne, I'm from ESPC. So I'm joined here by my colleague Ash, who is also from ESPC. Ash is just going to talk us through a bit of an update on the property market and just what's been happening, and then she'll lead us on our Q&A section. So thank you to everybody that has already pre-submitted questions in to us. So our panel of experts are looking forward to answering those for you. We have Andrew Diamond here from one of our ESPC member firms, Lindsay's, Paul DeMarco, who's one of our mortgage advisors at ESPC Mortgages, and we've got Alex Liddell, who is from Method Architects, who are a member of the Edinburgh Chartered Architect Network, ECAN. So just represent a group of different architects across Edinburgh. So great place to get in touch with. Just to quickly outline the format of today, as I say, Ash will give us a quick introduction. We'll follow that up with the pre-submitted Q&A questions that you've made. And if you have any other questions that come up during the course of today, just drop them in the Q&A box, and we'll try and answer as many of those as we can at the end. Alternatively, you can drop us an email and we can follow that up individually with you afterwards. So without any further ado, I'll pass you over to Ash for answering any questions.
Thanks so much, Leanne, and thank you again for everyone for coming along today. Really appreciate it. So as Leanne said today, I'm just going to talk you through the key figures from our house price report covering off the first quarter of 2021, which is the January to the March. So I think we'll all agree it's been a very unprecedented and very interesting year, and it's nice to know that there is some light at the end of the tunnel. We were just talking about that before everyone came on. In terms of the Scottish property market, if we take a step back and look back to last March, when the pandemic initially hit and subsequent lockdown restrictions were introduced, we witnessed a significant impact on the property market, with sales considerably lower than that of a usual really busy spring. I'm sure Andrew will agree with that one there. At that point, it was really hard for us to try and predict what was actually going to happen in the property market for 2020. But after initial lockdown restrictions eased as we went into the summer, the property market activity rose to exponential high levels. And we actually saw this continue going into autumn and also to the early months. So usually when we see typically quieter months coming into December, we still saw that there was a lot of demand there. So this kind of brings us into 2021. So we actually entered into 2021, into January, in a full lockdown. But we were still seeing really strong buyer demand there and shorter selling times, along with a rise in selling prices year on year. So it was a positive start for us. But I'm just going to talk you through some of those key stats from the January to the March, and that's covering Edinburgh, the Lothians, Fife, and also the Borders. So what did we see in the first 3 months of 2021? So first of all, the average property price for Edinburgh, the Lothians, and Fife and the Borders actually rose by 7.5%, and that's compared to the same time the previous year, so year on year, and that was at £259,000. Meanwhile, the average selling time was actually sitting at 26 days, so the median selling time was 26 days. And if we compare this to the year before, it was sitting at 27. So it was 1 day faster. So properties still selling very, very fast. For the same areas, the average percentage of home report achieved or attained, so this is how much over the 100% of the home report, was actually sitting at 102.1%. And this was versus 102.3% last year. So it was down ever so slightly, but not by too much there. If we have a look at how many properties actually came onto the market, or how many properties were listed that we saw coming on through ESPC in the last 3 months, it was very similar to last year. So it was up ever so slightly at 0.1%, but a lot of that volume is actually concentrated in the March periods. Sales, on the other hand, so if we look at that for Edinburgh, Lothians, Fife and the Borders, was up by a phenomenal 55.7% year on year, which is incredible. I think what kind of feeds into that, again, is most of you might know that we had an LBTT holiday, and that came to an end in March. So I think that's kind of what fed into the figures there. There was a lot of purchases completing and a lot of buyers and sellers trying to finalise those transactions. So again, just to kind of summarize what we saw there. So the first quarter showed us that demand remains relatively strong with rising selling prices on year. And we're starting to see an increase in homes coming to the market following a bit of a decline in January and February. And this, I think, is probably due to seller confidence. So we know that we're coming out of that lockdown now. People feel a little bit more confident, and hopefully that will continue and balance out that kind of buyer demand. But I think overall, we do believe that it will continue to be high levels of activity in the up and coming months. We do our house price report monthly, so you can definitely get more details as things progress into April. But you can also speak, if you want more localized stats, we can kind of provide that through your ESPC agent, or I'm sure Andrew would be happy to help you as well. So hopefully that's been helpful for you, and I've not kind of boggled your mind with too much information there. But I thought we'll move on to the Q&A section. So as Leanne said, it's pre-submitted questions. We've got 8 questions, so thank you so much to everyone for submitting them. And we'll just go around the panel of experts just now and we can get their expert advice. So the first one is coming to you, Andrew. We actually had a couple of questions that were very similar, so I think we can probably cover them off in the same question. But it was really just around asking prices. So how much over the asking price do you need to generally pay? Should we always expect to pay more than the property valuation? And another one was just about flats typically selling for higher than the home report value, and how much higher, if you would be happy to answer that.
Yeah, thanks, Ash. Happy to pick that one up. This is probably the question we get asked most often, and it often gets put to us in the context as solicitors dealing with purchases, gets put to us in the context of, is it true that you should be offering 10% over valuation? If I had £1 for every time I'd heard the old 10% over valuation question, I'd have a lot of pounds. The answer to the question is, listening to your stats there, Ash, is all very interesting and gives us a very interesting general overview of what's happening in the market, and it points to certain trends and certain things that are happening. But it goes back to the old, to some extent, we go back to the old saying about, lies, damn lies, and statistics. They prove something, but they're not of themselves definitive in relation to any particular situation. Within the property market, which people are very fond of talking about, there are in fact many, many, many smaller markets. It's a mosaic of little markets that all go together to make up one bigger market. And what's happening in one market is not always happening in another. You put them all together, you come out with a blend, you come out with an average. So you can come out with a figure, but it doesn't necessarily mean you can take that figure and apply it to any one of those individual markets. The same thing goes for an individual property. The answer to the 10% question and the how much over should we offer, the answer to that is it depends. And it depends on the circumstances. That may sound like a cop-out answer to the question, because I can't say to you it's 6% or it's 12% or it's 8.4%. It doesn't work like that. What this comes back to is supply and demand. What drives price is competition. This is supply and demand economics at a fairly basic level. If there is, the higher the demand for a property, generally speaking, the higher the level the price is going to go. That bit of it is not rocket science. What's going to happen in any particular situation depends on the particular circumstances. So anytime I'm advising a client in relation answering that question, I'm always going to say that I can't answer the question for you generically for you to apply to a particular property. We can talk about general trends in the market and what's happening generally. When you want to talk about this particular property, come back and talk to me about it, and we'll look at all the factors, all that's going on, which market's it in, what's happening in relation to this particular property, what do we think would happen on an average day with average breaks and an average wind at a closing date, and we can give you some advice on that. But the advice in relation to one property might be quite different to the advice given in relation to a different property with different circumstances. Sorry, that was a bit of a long answer to what sounded like quite a simple question, but it's not as simple as it's X%. It's much more. It's a much subtler answer than that, and in any situation what I would encourage anybody who's got the question about a particular property to do is go and talk to your solicitor about that and get some advice. They should know what's going on in the market and be able to chat you through any particular property or any particular set of circumstances.
Definitely. I think that's perfect, Andrew, because I think it's quite interesting that lots of different areas are so different, and if we all know exactly how much to pay over, it would be such an easier game. So thanks so much.
I mean, sorry Ash, the point in some ways that should you always expect to pay over at the moment, there's a lot of competition in the market, there's a lot of demand in the market just now, so there's not much that's changing hands at below valuation, but that's not to say there aren't properties selling at valuation or below it. To some extent it depends, sometimes it depends where the valuation's fixed. Remember, valuing's it's an art, not a science as well. Maybe it depends how full the valuation is to begin with, to some extent. The flat market is still fairly buoyant. The house market is very, very hot. The flat market isn't perhaps as hot as the house market is just now. People are looking for extra space for home working. They're definitely looking for outdoor space, but the flat market is still pretty strong as well. There's just an example of two different levels of heat in two different bits of the market.
Amazing. So if you want any more advice about anything more local or a bit more granular, definitely get in touch with, I'm sure Andrew would be happy to help you with that as well. So moving on to the next question. Paul, this one is for you. So is it possible to get a 90 or a 95% mortgage?
Yeah, good afternoon. The simple answer to that is yes, but I will elaborate on that answer. Just to explain how mortgages how mortgages work. They're based on the lower of the purchase price of the valuation. So if you want a 90% mortgage, it's obviously 90% of the lower of the purchase price of the valuation, and also for 95%. Okay, so with 95%, they are available. They've come on very recently, from about a couple of weeks ago. You can get a mortgage at 95% for a house or a flat. The market is pretty limited if you want a flat. Mainly all the lenders so far, and I think so far there's about 10 that have shown their hand. There are a few more to come on, more towards the end of the month. But 95% is definitely possible for first and second time buyers, and on houses and on flats. And basically, if you want further information on that, just get in contact with us.
Thanks, Paul. Yes, if you're looking for any mortgage advice, please just drop Paul a note. Okay, so the third question, Andrew, back to you again. Can you buy a property from a virtual viewing if you're unable to do an in-person viewing?
Short answer to the question is yes. We should perhaps follow Paul's example and elaborate a little on that. You can. There's nothing to say you have to view a property before you buy it, technically. Although that would be unusual. The object of the exercise, the way the virtual viewings are designed, is they are supposed to be a sift to begin with. The request of purchasers is that they start off with a virtual viewing to see whether they are seriously interested in a property. It is still perfectly possible to do in-person viewings. There are lots and lots of in-person viewings happening. What we're trying to avoid generally at the minute, for the sake of buyers and sellers, is unnecessary in-person viewings. I think my general advice would be, if you're serious about putting an offer in for something, if you think something is a real live proposition for you, if it is at all possible, have an actual in-person viewing as well. You put your offer in. The answer to the question is you can buy based purely on the virtual viewing, but probably try and use the virtual viewings as a sift and make sure you have, if possible, done an in-person viewing of the property before you get to offer stage. So, but cut down your number of actual viewings by using the virtual viewings that way. It's worth bearing in mind, if you do get an offer accepted, the normal practice is that at the point where an offer is agreed in principle, the purchaser normally doesn't get access to the property again until missives are concluded. In other words, until they are legally, contractually committed to buying the property. So by and large, putting an offer in, having it accepted, and then saying, I'd now like to go and see it before I'm committing myself to buying it, that's not going to work generally. So if you want to see before you buy, do make sure you have an in-person viewing.
Definitely. Good answer, Andrew. Thank you so much. So next one, again, Paul, for you. So I'm interested in getting a project property, but can I get a mortgage that'll include the renovation costs?
Sorry, I was muted there. The simple answer to that one is no, you can't.
Yeah.
I'll go back to the 90 to 95% scenario again. You know, obviously, let's say you have a very small deposit, which would be 5 or 10%. The answer to that is no, really. My advice on that is if you have a bigger deposit, say 15 or 20% or even more than that, is you hold back some of the money that you would want to utilize towards the renovation costs, and possibly then take a mortgage out at, with a 10 or 5 or 10% deposit. That's the only way around it. And simple answer is no, you can't add the renovation costs onto the mortgage.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks. Well, I mean, it would be great if they did. Thanks so much. Alex, we've got a question up here for you. So what is the process for obtaining planning permission in Edinburgh? And typically, what kind of work does or does not require planning permission?
Okay, there's several parts to that. So to begin with, the process for obtaining planning permission is to submit a planning application. So in advance of application, you need to develop a design, ideally with an architect. Planning are more concerned with the external appearance of the building, but to do that, you need to have a reasonable idea of the internal layout, so you know what size and shape the building is. Planning will focus on materials used, the style of the design, as well as the size, and of interest in how well it fits with the buildings around it. Normally, planning applications are submitted using the e-development portal. An architect could do that for you. And for simple applications, it should take about 8 weeks, but if there's complications, it can take longer. Alterations to buildings are about, the fee for alterations is about £200, and for a new house, it's about £400. I should add that in Edinburgh, there's quite a few conservation areas, and if you're applying for changes in those areas, it's more attention paid to those applications. So the materials have to be of good quality and so forth. And if your building's listed, again, there's a higher level of scrutiny applied to such applications. So that's a bit more complex as well. There's a separate application for buildings that are listed that runs in parallel with the planning application. I've got some guidance, which is published by City of Edinburgh for householders. So I've copied a link into the chat function, and if you're interested, you can read some backgrounds on applications there. And I'll briefly mention, not every change requires planning consent. There is permitted development. So there's guidance published by the Scottish Government that defines what is allowed. Usually you can extend your house by up to 3 meters at the back. But there's other things to consider, such as the height and the effect on neighbours. So that's not always possible. Again, an architect can guide you, but here is the guidance for permitted development, and it gives you a feel for what's allowed. And it includes things like ancillary buildings. So if you've got a shed, you know, a shed in your garden, it tells you what size of shed you can do and where you can put it. If you want some sort of proof that you don't need planning consent, you can get what's called a certificate of lawfulness, which is a lesser level of permission, which proves that you've had a discussion around the permitted development. So when you come to sell, you can say, yes, we talked about that. Here's the permitted development note, and it helps when you come to sell. So I mentioned architects a few times there, so that's the general message. If you want to go for planning, it's best to engage an architect, and ECAN architects are a good place to look. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alex. So yeah, if you are looking to find out more information, as Alex said, please get in touch. We'd be more than happy to talk you through any queries that you have on that. So next one, we have a question. Is it a good time to buy a holiday property, or is the market too hot? And Andrew, that's one for you.
I'll just try and fish out my crystal ball, Ash, to answer that one. Again, it doesn't come as a great surprise that the questions we get most often are around price, value, how hard or easy is it going to be to buy? And the answers to these kind of questions you always get are a wee bit of the nature of it depends. You're not often going to get a black and white answer to that kind of thing. The market generally just now, and this is being very, very general, the market is fairly hot. There are a lot of buyers out there. This is, again, we come back to supply meeting demand and how do the two things mesh. You could look at this question two slightly different ways. If you are looking at it saying, will prices come back down from the level they're at just now? It's possible. It's like residential property is like anything else. Prices can fall as well as rise. You get the same warning you would get if you buy stocks and shares or invest in anything. Nothing is guaranteed. Prices go up as well as down. It is possible that as we start to see more supply coming to the market to balance out a bit of the demand that's there, it's possible you'll see the effect might be a slight dampening of prices. It's quite possible. As you mentioned earlier on, there hasn't been an awful lot of supply coming to market. I think not quite an answer to the question, but I think there will be more supply coming as we start to come out of lockdown. We're already seeing more supply. I'm not so sure that's actually been just because of lockdown in itself. I think a lot of that had to do with schools. Yeah. I think a lot of people who would have been naturally been inclined to market, who suddenly had kids homeschooling. I think that was a bridge too far for some people. And now that schools are back and we're after Easter and things are a wee bit more normal with kids in schools, I think you might see a few more properties actually coming to market to help the supply. So will prices come back down? Maybe. I don't know is the answer to that. Anybody who tells you they know that for sure ain't telling you the truth. Will properties become more buyable even at the same sort of price? Quite possibly. I mean, the level of purchaser demand we're seeing just now is extremely high. Does it intuitively feel like there might be a leveling out at some point between supply and demand, moving back towards there being a bit more supply? Quite possibly. Could it move the other way? Yeah, absolutely it could. As I say, my crystal ball is the answer to the question here inevitably involves speculation. I can't give you a yes, this is definitely what's going to happen type answer to that. But it is quite possible markets will settle. Things over the longer term, markets do tend to come back into some sort of recognizable kilter where supply and demand start to match up a wee bit better. But certainly, generally speaking, just now we've got demand outstripping supply with the inevitable effect on price.
Definitely, Andrew. Yeah, and I guess if anyone is kind of looking to find out more information at the time, please just get in touch with your solicitor and they can try and guide you through, again, those more kind of figures as to where you're looking to buy as well, or holiday properties. But yeah, Andrew, actually there's another one that's came on the back, Andrew, for you. You're in the hot seat today. What is the panel's view on the Scottish properties being possible focus on buyers from the south of England? And do they think this applies to premier properties only?
That's almost like a natural follow-on to the last question in some ways, Ash. I've been asked this a few times recently, and the angle that the press are very interested in just now is the one about London buyers coming up and buying up properties in Edinburgh and the Lothians. They're very keen to play up these horrible London Sassenachs come up here buying our homes from us. They're desperate to be able to play that card and find a sensational angle on it. I think I think that the reality is the reality is different to that. The reality is that people generally have a lot more options now, and I think lockdown has and the way people have changed their working habits and people are able to see what is possible. It's changed the way a lot of people are looking at a lot of things. And that includes people who are perhaps based in the southeast of England who look at it and say, do I need to be in London or in the environs? And there are undoubtedly people who have looked at that and said, actually, no, I could be based back in Scotland if Scotland's home, or even if it's not originally home, and who are changing the way they the way they look at things and where they need to be based for their work. But that's not a peculiarly London or Southeast or top of the market type thing. We've seen folk on different levels. We've seen folk coming back from the Far East, Australia, America, all who would call Scotland or the UK or wherever home, and they look at it and think, actually, we can change what we do and work in a different way. You can see the same phenomenon happening with people who might be based around a big city like London, looking like it and saying, yeah, okay, we don't need to be in the location we're in just now. We could do something slightly different. We're also seeing it in Edinburgh, though, in Scottish cities, where you're seeing people who maybe we thought they needed or wanted to be based in the city centre because they were close to work, or based within, say, a half-hour commute of where their work was, now looking at it and saying, actually, a commuter distance isn't half an hour just now, because I'm not doing it every day. I'm looking at it going forward, saying I might do this twice a week or 3 times a fortnight. Therefore, I'm quite happy to be an hour away from my work. It's changed. What's happened over the last wee while has changed the outlook of a lot of people on just what's practical for them. And one wee bit of that is the top end of the market. One wee bit of that is people coming from down south. But I think what's happened, I think that's only one example or one wee bit of what's happening much more generally in the market, where a lot of people are looking at it and saying, actually, we're less restricted perhaps in what's practical for us than we once were. And that largely ties into flexibility around people thinking there's more flexibility around, I think, how they work and how they commute.
Yeah, definitely. That's a really good answer, Andrew. Thank you so much. I know that for myself, being in a flat during lockdown definitely made me want to have a bigger garden. So people's priorities do definitely change. So yeah, that was a really good answer there. And we're on to our last question. And Alex, this is another one for you. I'm looking at buying a plot and was wanting to know more about planning permission. Does the planning permission need to be reapplied for if I want to build a different building? For example, permission already for a 3-bedroom and I want to build something smaller.
Okay, planning may be required, but if the changes are minor, it might be that these can be considered as non-material variations. So there is a process by which you can make slight changes to a planning application without going through the process again. But this is subject to discussion with the planners, and for the planners to deem it to be a non-material variation. By material, they mean not just the materials you build with, but whether the change is significant or not. And there's a degree of subjectivity in that. So really you need to talk to the planners to find out what they think about the changes. As of the 1st of April this year, City of Edinburgh has launched a non-material variation service. So it's now a bit more formalized. There's a form one can fill in to submit the revised design. So in some ways, it's not a huge difference in that you do have to have proper drawings to have that discussion. So you might have to have a set, which is very similar to a planning set of drawings, but you can avoid the time periods that come with planning with a non-material variation. So making it smaller is probably to your advantage. That's one of the key things that planners look at when assessing an application. But there might be other aspects of design that are significant. So if you use different materials or there's a different style, the planners may not be as happy with that as they were with the first. So it does require a discussion. But of course, if planning is required, it's not the end of the world. The application is just £400 for a new build. Obviously, it's the time periods that come with that. Although having already had an application for the site, there should be a good precedent for another application being accepted. So you're probably in quite a good position if there's already consent in place. In non-COVID times, you could walk down to Waverley Court in East Market Street and talk to a planner, but obviously that's not happening just now. But it is possible to email the front desk and have questions answered by email, which is not as useful. Obviously, a dialogue is much more constructive, but as a second best, you can email the planners. And as always, an architect can help you if you if you need some guidance.
Yeah, that's a key take-home point.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alex. So that's us come to the end of our pre-submitted questions. Leanne, do we have any other ones that have popped up?
Yeah, we've just got one. It's for you, Paul. So just if anyone else wants to pop in any other questions just now, just drop them in. But yeah, Paul, I'd like to ask if you can get a mortgage if I'm paid in euros and live permanently in the UK.
Yeah, good question. Yes, you can actually. It is a specialised type of mortgage, and there are very few lenders that do it. But the answer to that is possibly. And that I use that word possibly because it does depend on a number of other factors. It depends on how long you've worked in the company for, who the company is it an international company, and a whole load of other factors. But an answer to the question, you can. Yeah. I don't know if you would get it or not, but certainly it is possible.
That's great. Thanks for that, Paul. That's useful. Didn't know that one. So that was a good one for me. There's one here that's just popped in for you there, Andrew. I'm sorry, I'm just going to expand this. Okay. Oh, I've lost it. So
yeah,
asking there about LBTT.
Yep.
So if we can pay with a credit card or if it's bank transfer only.
The answer to that is you won't pay the LBTT directly to Revenue Scotland. The way it will work in practice is the solicitor who's completing the purchase for you will make the submission on your behalf, having had a submission pre-approved by you, and will settle the LBTT with and any additional dwelling supplement, if that's relevant, will settle that with Revenue Scotland on your behalf immediately following settlement of your completion of your purchase. It's not possible actually you can't register your title without the tax being paid. And so that's the actual mechanics of the payment process are handled by your solicitor. So taking that back a step, your solicitor is going to need the funds from you to be able to make payment to Revenue Scotland on your behalf. Generally speaking, solicitors aren't going to be concerned about whether you're paying them by bank transfer or by credit card, or I wouldn't generally see that as being an issue. Most solicitors have got the capability of taking payments by credit card. They will have questions for you about your funds and where they've come from, and we all have to deal with things in relation to anti-money laundering and source of wealth and things these days, but those are slightly different questions. But I wouldn't see making a payment by card to your solicitor being an issue.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for that, Andrew. So I've not seen any other questions or anything else come in just now. So I think we will just thank you all very much for coming along today. We'll upload the video of this onto our YouTube. We'll share it on our social. So if you've got anything else that you want to play back and listen to, if there's any answers, any intricacies that you wanted to go over again, they'll be there. As I say, you can get in touch with us just at marketing@espc.com if you want any further information from any of the panelists on any more details there, and we can definitely try and help. So thanks all for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Okay.
Go and enjoy the sunshine.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks. Bye now.